Hello, welcome, and thanks for joining me. As I'm doing this video, the COVID-19 pandemic is still out there raging and has been for several months, and it shows no signs really of letting up anytime soon, at least here in the United States. So, over the course of the last few months, many people have turned to books, right, for comfort and for escape from all the anxiety around the pandemic. And, had these COVID-19 pandemic reads. I've seen lists of good books to read during the pandemic. And I really hadn't up until this point, up until getting this poetry collection. I had really just been reading along with my books that I had already kind of decided to read on my want to read list for 2020. And until I came across this collection of poetry, A Sinking Ship is Still a Ship. This collection of poetry is by Ariel Francisco. This collection was published this year in 2020, and it has also a Spanish translation in it. So the Spanish translation is done by José Nicolás Cabrera-Schneider, and this was published by Burrow Press, this collection. So A Sinking Ship is Still a Ship by Ariel Francisco. So why is this my COVID-19 read? It's really because of the title. I saw this title, A Sinking Ship is Still a Ship. So just think of a bit about what that means to you, and then I'll kind of explain what it meant to me. Over the last few months, I've heard frequently, and I actually even heard this yesterday from a major political figure in one of the states, sort of dismiss the pandemic by saying it only affects older people over 65, and it only really the mortality the people that really only have to worry about it, they're sick anyway, they have other conditions. And to me, this title really just sort of applied because a sinking ship is still a ship. So a person may be old or they may be ill, but they're still a person, right? So they still matter. So they may be a sinking ship, but they're still a ship. So that's why I decided to pick up this collection of poetry. It really was just based on this title. So what the collection's really about, or at least according to the back, is it says Ariel Francisco's second book of poems deals with climate change and the absurdities and difficulties of being a millennial Latinx in the Sunshine State. So it's really about climate change and life in Florida and this sort of view of Florida as this decaying place. But I like poetry and literature and reading whenever I can apply multiple meanings to things. And so even though this book's, basic theme is life in Florida at this particular time and with climate change coming, I think a lot of these poems really, can have multiple meanings, and I just love that. So what I did, how I thought I would approach this chat is I just pulled out 5 of the poems. Now, I'm not going to read the poems per se because this is a collection of poetry, and I feel like that would dishonor the poet. I'm not here to do a poetry reading of this poet. I am here to just really talk about this collection. So I'm not going to read the entire poem, but just some lines from the poem or maybe the titles of certain poems that really just sort of jumped out at me. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is the title of the poem is called Sinking City, and this is probably my favorite poem out of the whole collection. But just this first line: beyond rescue, Miami is a cruise ship lost at sea with no lifeboats, throwing an all-night dance party. And then there's more to the poem, obviously, but just that beyond rescue, Miami is a cruise ship lost at sea with no lifeboats, throwing an all-night dance party. So on the one hand, this is Miami, the city of Miami in southern Florida, oblivious to the climate change that's coming, right, and just going ahead and partying. But when I read this, I jotted down a person in trouble. So have you ever known someone who is have some sort of problem in their life, and they just seem to be lost, but they're rather oblivious to it, or at least they are trying to cover up their their situation by other things like drinking or drugs or partying or some sort of other way of denial of a problem at hand. And so that's sort of the other meaning that I brought to this poem. Beyond rescue, Miami is a cruise ship lost at sea with no lifeboats, throwing an all-night dance party. I just love that. Okay, so then the next one I was going to talk about, the name of the poem itself is called An Insomnia Poem. And there's several poems in this collection about insomnia. But the opening line of this poem is, night nails stars into the darkening sky like a father fixing a roof post-storm. So night nails stars into the darkening sky. I love that imagery because, usually I think we think of the night coming on as this peaceful thing and the stars blink on, and so this is sort of a romantic view of night, and it's sort of a dreamy view of night where the stars are accompanying us, and so I think the imagery of the stars being nailed in, like with a hammer, that is a completely different sort of imagery of night coming. And so, insomnia, obviously it relates to, but night nails stars into the darkening sky like a father fixing a roof post-storm. So this is, to me, is like a person at night thinking about problems. A father fixing a roof post-storm could be, to me, like the cosmos fixing the problems of the day, hammering in, but it's keeping, him awake. The problems of the day, hammering those stars into the sky. I just think that imagery is so beautiful. So yeah, the next poem I was going to talk about is called Stillwater/Still Water. So Stillwater, one word, /Still Water, two words. So the opening line of this is, I've outlasted more gray skies in this life than I care to count, and I will survive many more, this I know. It's the blue that kills me. So again, I love that imagery. I've outlasted more gray skies in this life than I care to count, and I will survive many more, this I know. It's the blue that kills me. It's the blue that kills me. So this is, usually we think of blue skies as blue skies, everything's fine, if the sky's blue is happy, but it's the gray skies, it's the blue that's killing him. So it's when it's all over, when it's still, that's when the problems start for him, And so I love that sort of imagery of turning around. What is a blue sky is often what we consider to be when the trouble is over. But when the trouble is over, sometimes that's really when the problem actually is just beginning, right? So, yeah. All right, so the next poem. This is just the title I'm going to read because this title says it all. The poem itself is actually also really, really good, but the title of the poem is, I want to be as free as the hubcap that just fell off my tire on the 826 and traversed 4 lanes of traffic unscathed. So that's a long title, but let's just read it again. I want to be as free as the hubcap that just fell off my tire on the 826 and traversed 4 lanes of traffic unscathed. So that's a metaphor to me of like life, right? So, you broke away, this hubcap broke away from its confines, which was on the car, and went into this wild freedom and made it through all these dangers and this, it made it through a very dangerous minefield and then came to rest, sort of at the end of a person's life. But it lived this free life unscathed. And I just love that imagery. I want to be as free as the hubcap that just fell off my tire on the 826 and traversed 4 lanes of traffic unscathed. And when this hubcap comes to rest, it comes to rest face up, facing the sky, So it's really kind of a beautiful imagery of life. So I love that poem. That's probably my second favorite poem. And then finally, this last one I'm going to talk about, the title of the poem is called Paul Celan Floated in the Seine for 11 days before he was found. So Paul Celan floated in the Seine for 11 days before he was found. I actually meant to look up Paul Celan because I don't know who that is. But what I wanted, the first line of the poem says, "Sometimes spring brings no change. Sometimes the air's heaviness sieves into this life little by little until even the genius mechanism of our hearts go tired and torrid." So I love that first line. Sometimes spring brings no change. Again, it's one of those instances where we usually think of spring as everything, it's a new beginning, so therefore that's a good thing, and it's a sign of hope when spring arrives. But this poem starts out by talking about, sometimes spring doesn't bring a change. So sometimes what we think of as a rebirth doesn't really change things. So to me, this poem was really about a state of depression and how a person can be sort of excluded from, an external sort of movement of change there's really change their inner world, and it goes on to say, that the heavy air drips into their heart like a sieve, and weighs them down, and so they get sort of bogged down. So I just thought that imagery was so cool. So I love this collection for this reason, and that is because even though it is on one level, it's about climate change, it's about life in Florida for this Latino the poet. I believe the poet was raised in Florida of immigrant parents, and now lives, I think, in New York City. But that sort of view of life, Florida is kind of the way it's pictured is just sort of the decaying aspect of Florida, like shopping malls and strip malls. A lot of times, sort of shabby, and then also storms, and the climate change, water everywhere. So a lot of that imagery, but then it can mean other things to me, and that's what I enjoy about poetry, is that it's that transcendent, like it's about more than one thing at a time, and the poem is not about one particular thing. It can be about, you bring it. A good poetry to me transcends any sort of anything concrete, and is really a way to take you, into a different place emotionally or spiritually. So A Sinking Ship is Still a Ship by Ariel Francisco. I really did enjoy this. This is his second collection, I guess, and I definitely am thinking about trying to find his first. Also, I wanted to just call out this press. This press is apparently a small press in Florida, and they have a subscription in the back here. They list all their subscribers. They put out 4 works a year, so this is one of their works that they're putting out for 2020. But the press is called, I guess it's Burrow Press, and they have the 2020 Illiterati. It says here, Florida isn't known as a bastion of literature. Being one of the few literary publishers in the state, we embrace this misperception with good humor. That's why we refer to our subscribers as the Illiterati and recognize them each year in our print books and online. So I think that's a very worthy cause, and it seems like they're putting out some really great stuff. So A Sinking Ship is Still a Ship, a collection of poetry by Ariel Francisco. My next read is going to be a little unusual for me, a presidential biography, Hoover, An Extraordinary Life in Extraordinary Times by Kenneth Whyte. I will explain of all the presidents to choose from to read a presidential biography, something I've never really read and chatted on my channel. I don't read these I actually haven't read them in years, read one in probably 20 or 30 years. Why I decided to choose Hoover, I'll explain that in the chat. Should be coming up fairly soon. All right, until next time, take care.